Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 58th webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheading Moria Federation Webinars. Then in this little box, you'll find webinar series in progress. All episodes of this, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar you wish to view. You may join any of these webinars on the homepage of MoriaFederation.com. Okay, last month, while still in this subsection on the centers and the senses, we continued with this really long footnote that starts on page 205 and goes all the way over to 206, by taking a look at how the 7 planetary logoi influence the 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane, as well as the rounds of a chain of our Earth's scheme, each of which carries the name of one of the planetary logoi, as you see here. And finally, we took a look at how the 7 logoi influence, quote, some world period, some root race, some subrace, some branch race, some group, and some human unit. We then considered the fractal-like interconnectedness of these logoi, using Mercury as an example to show how pervasive each of these planetary logoi influence is, reaching right down into, as he describes here, all the way down to influence on some human unit. We can assume that that has to do with the astrology of the person, but more surprisingly and not so much talked about is that it can that these logoi have influence over some group, as well as the root races. For instance, we're in the 5th root race right now, and so it's likely, because of the consistency of Mercury's influence with the 5th cycle in whatever is being calculated, that Mercury is influencing the 5th root race, though I don't know that that's said anywhere. And of course, it makes sense, since it's the root race during which we are developing mind. Okay. We then took a look at a footnote that quotes an old commentary. Wait a minute. Oh no, I'm ahead of myself. Next, we looked at the dual rulership of each of the centers in a heavenly man, with the actual center represented by each chain, as shown here. Now we're talking about the chakras in a scheme logos, right, which is called the heavenly man. And so for our Earth scheme, these are those 7 chakras, right? And again, and this is given by DK. In fact, it formed the key that allowed us to expand this idea of just what these planetary logoi do influence. So here we see just exactly where they influence. Now the trick is, and it's without more information and pretty much impossible to do, would be to figure out just which of these chakras is which, So I don't think it goes right according to number, because you would have you look at the seventh chain and the first chain, you would either have Mercury or Neptune as the ruler of the head center. So, and Venus as the ruler of, either the sacral center or the ajna center. So, that would take a lot more work to figure out just which of the centers of a heavenly man these different chains actually represent. It'd be an interesting study. There's not much in the blue books to support it, except for by correlation, mostly by the quality of number itself, Anyway, we then took a look at a footnote that quotes an old commentary describing the Atmic, Buddhic, and monastic principles of man in terms of the three-tongued flame and man's lower quaternary in terms of the four wicks. That's also here. Next, we learned that the Earth is, quote, the most mysterious of all the planets, and that the karma of our planetary logos has been a heavy one, veiled in the mystery of personality at this time. And that pretty much takes us up to where we left off last time. I want to encourage you to, anytime you have a thought or a comment, just the only thing I ask is that you keep it relevant to the material that we're covering. As much as I'd like to have just a general wrap session about theosophy in general, in order to keep our series forward moving, keep it relevant. Also, anytime you have any questions at all, please raise your hand, and Mikhail will help with that. So next up, we come to the last subsection of this larger division entitled The Centers and Initiations. Can we get a reader, please, for this first passage?
Barbara, you want to read?
Five, the centers and initiation. We have dealt briefly with the evolution of the centers, with their function, their organization, and their gradually increasing activity from a point of comparative inertia until they are consummated motion. Then they become living wheels of flame, distinguished by a dual motion of the periphery and the inner revolving wheels, and by a fourth dimensional effect due primarily to the alignment of the inner subtler vortices with the comparatively exotic etheric centers. This alignment is brought about eventually at initiation. At the time that initiation is taken, the centers are all active, and the lower four, which correspond to the personality, are beginning the process of translating the fire into the three higher. The dual revolution in the lower centers is clearly to be seen, and the three higher are commencing to be similarly active.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, DK gets a summary paragraph on the section we just finished called Motion and the Centers, which includes development of the centers from points of inertia to living fourth dimensional wheels of flame, and which, and this is new, come about as a result of, quote, alignment of the inner subtler vortices with the comparatively exoteric etheric centers. So the use of the word vortices suggests, first of all, a higher grade of substance that allows for alignment with the centers in the Buddhic and Atmic sheaths, which DK also described as vortices. You may remember that this alignment links the astral and the Buddhic sheaths at the second initiation and the mental and atmic sheaths at the third initiation. The whole idea of a vortice suggests passage from one place to another. It's a system of movement and it suggests like an inward movement. Yes, Barbara. You have to unmute.
That the vortices in the human body are are from some sort of central point that moves out through the sheaths. So I'm wondering in the centers that you just showed us in the diagram, are these centers vortices also?
Well, that's a yeah. It's yeah. That's a that's a terrific question. Let's just go back there and just contemplate that idea. So if we go back, it's always further than I think. So these are the 7 chains of the Earth scheme, which DK tells us, and yeah, right here, that each of the 7 chains might be looked upon as picturing the 7 centers of one of the heavenly men. So this is the picturing, quote unquote, of the vortex of the chakras, you could say, the centers in the Earth scheme, that Earth heavenly man, represented by Sanat Kumara. So, in their role as vortices of force, that would allow an interconnectedness between the centers, as well as to centers in other heavenly men. Because vortices, it's a dual function, which is that it gathers both centrifugally and centripetally appropriate matter so that it can best express the stage of consciousness that the heavenly man is at. But it also acts as a mover of energy. The question is from where to where? Well, we know from study of our own centers, and that's the only system that we actually know anything about. There's not anything said about the transfer of energy within the centers of the heavenly man, for instance. But we know, for instance, that there's a sequential transfer, for instance, from the sacral center to the throat and from the solar plexus to the heart. So doesn't it make perfect sense, since there's such a strong as above, so below paradigm, that if we could determine the heart center of the heavenly man, and for instance, the sacral center, that there would be a tremendous energetic flow between them. One obvious candidate would be our Earth chain, and the second chain, Venus. Now, these centers exist simultaneously. There's a simultaneity to the influence of these centers in this great being, the heavenly man. We tend to think of them as sequentially unfolding, but in essence, they stand beyond space and time. So even though the second chain is the Venus chain, and for instance, the Earth was relatively undeveloped by comparison to the fourth chain, outside of time and space, one might hypothesize that Venus would represent the heart center and Earth the solar plexus, and therefore the you could say the interconnection, this threefold interconnection that is shown right? Of course, that's pure speculation. You could make a, a claim too that there is um, a um, a uh, a monastic center in the fifth chain, the Mercury chain. Um, so it's a fascinating and you're not going to come up with any definite conclusions by looking at this, but and also then you can take it all the way down to the globes within, for instance, just the Earth chain. Uh, for instance, do they represent the same centers within the Earth chain as they do within the entire Earth scheme? Well, interestingly, the position is different. Like Venus here stands as one of the outer four, whereas for the entire Earth scheme, the Venus chain stands on the inner among the inner three. This also, to me, suggests the possibility that it is one of the higher centers. But pure speculation, but a great question. Yes, Maria Christina.
I just wondered, I'm sure you've heard reference to the Earth as being a center at the base of the spine as well. Have you seen
Oh,
that?
yeah, in relation, yes. It's DK says in TCF that three of the globes in the Earth chain um, represent, and in the present time, the base chakra of the solar logos. So
Ah,
this is another um, piece of information that's truly extraordinary. You know, the idea that see, this is again one of those things that stands outside of sequential time, because we know these globes to be sequentially existent when in fact they're in a place outside of time. They are concurrent. You know, certainly if they represent the base of the spine center in the solar logos, they must have a concurrent influence, even if they're not outwardly manifesting. So it's interesting stuff. Okay, all right. Anyone else?
I was just thinking also as you were talking, rather than, yeah, okay, all existing at the same time, within time, if they're in a different space, so that but he says point blank, it's sequential. I was just thinking of the varying refinement of
Mm-hmm.
the substance itself.
Well,
Anyway,
because we have a prejudice towards outer demonstration, right? For us, it's quote unquote real if it's manifesting on the physical plane, and like in the case of our human race, that it's demonstrating on the mental, astral, and physical planes. But the inner, the globes that are not currently representing the outer demonstration of the planetary scheme um, are still active in their own uh, for their own purposes. That's never talked about, but and they're only sequential in their outer demonstration as
nice,
the
nice,
globe of the planetary scheme.
nice, nice, nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Barbara read this for us and was talking about um, the fact that DK, this is a summary paragraph on this section we just finished, the motion in the centers, which includes development of the centers from points of inertia to living fourth dimensional wheels of flame, and this is new, comes, and I've said this, but to me this is so fantastic, comes about as a result of, quote, alignment of the inner subtler vortices. And then we had a discussion about these vortices, which led to our conversation. But, you know, the way DK works, it always fascinates me that he will give you 3 points of 4 will be information you've been given before, and then he'll add something. It's actually a terrific pedagogical method, because he's repeating something that you have some understanding of, and then he adds a new thing. This is that new thing in this part, right? We've learned all this information in the last 100 pages, but here, this idea of the alignment of inner subtler vortices with a comparatively exoteric etheric centers. This is the whole conversation, because are these vortices a group of spokes, also called lotus petals, within a given chakra? And he does single out a particular group of these what he calls spokes when he starts talking about the spirale. And so maybe this is actually an introduction to that. It's hard to say. Anyway, next. Yes, Gordon.
Could the inner subtler vortices be centers on the astral plane and the mental plane?
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't considered that. It's so you're then from the etheric physical plane perspective, then, for instance, the astral heart center would be an inner subtler vortice of that etheric heart center, and the mental sheath's heart center, a subtler vortice, and yet even higher subtler vortice. You know what I like about that idea, which I hadn't considered, is that vortice also suggests interconnectedness. And we know, DK has told us that the sensors in the 3 sheaths are aligned. The activation of them is sequential. With the earlier activation with the etheric and then gradually moving up. In fact, he says somewhere that they're connected with the first 3 initiations. That the activation of the centers in the 3 sheaths are sequential, beginning with the first initiation. So, I think that's a real valid possibility there. I like that, actually. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, good stuff. Thanks, guys. That kind of thing is perfect. Okay. So next up, at the time that initiation is taken, the sensors are all active. And the lower 4, which correspond to the personality, are beginning the process of translating the fire into the higher 3. So we might assume that DK is here speaking of the first initiation when he just says, at the time that initiation is taken. But, he's being general here. Yes, James.
I thought the personality was the lower 3.
It's actually made up of all 3 sheaths, and it would be made up of the chakras within the lower chakras within all 3 sheaths. The mental sheath is the source of our lower mind, eventually the source of higher mind. The astral sheath, the source of our emotional body, is our emotional body, the astral sheath. and it's accessed via the solar plexus of the etheric body. So there's a process where one integrates these she's. Before that, you are in a condition called cleavage, where there's not direct communication or very tenuous communication between the she's. In Leo, one goes through a process called individuation, not individualization, which happens when the soul overshadows animal man, but individuation. And as a result of that, there's a healing of the cleavages, which is called the integration or the integrated personality. It's actually, relatively speaking, a high state of becoming. And that is free flow of energy between the three sheaths. So I'm glad you're asking this question right now, because if you align that with what Gordon was talking about, the idea of these vortices connecting the sheaths, you can see that they could be a function of integration. In fact,
But as you start activating the heart chakra, isn't that moving above the lower self?
certainly, yes, that's one of the primary transfers that happen at well, to my mind, it happens at the second initiation. Though there's two main transfers that happen in the first two initiations. One's from the sacral center to the throat, and the other from the solar plexus to the heart. And they happen sequentially at the first and second initiations. Right. So by that time, one would have integrated the personality, and so these transfers would have a great effect on the higher she's. Okay. So, yeah, I just read this. Yes, Maria Christina. I guess you're still muted. Okay, I'm gonna let you sort that out.
I'm sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just saying, I think what was being asked was the centers, the lowest four centers. Which would be the lowest four centers? The heart?
No,
So it would be which four?
it would be base of the spine. Oh, that's a good question. The spleen is considered a lesser center and is part of the lower quaternary, even though it's the very next line of centers. But you're right to point that out, that you're really only looking at base of the spine, the sacral, and the solar plexus. But there's actually a number of lesser centers. The greatest among those being the spleen, which is that center which is the source of the transfer of prana and of etheric energy. If that stays active throughout the process, the transferring happens from the three main lower centers. But good question. It is in fact a quaternary, and that makes sense in terms of everything we know about quaternaries, right? That it's the lower four and the higher three. Maria Christina, do you have your hand up again? Okay, Magda.
Hi. If I think we can keep it schematically, 1, 2, 3, 4, the lower quaternary. So including the number 4, the heart, because that's the fourth globe, the first chain, and the fourth scheme. It's the middle Antahkarana chakra, by which we go up to the three upper ones. So the throat is the next one, and that's why the color green and the number 4 chain, globe chain and scheme are so important, because now we have to transmit. We have to go to number 5 of all of this, which corresponds to the Jupiter, to the next level, to the next globe. So we have to transmute, solarize the astral bodies, which we call manas. The angelication in Christian esoteric terminology. So that's why also looking at the scheme that you first showed, it's the number 4 Earth globe corresponds in the Venus chain to the number 4. So there is a perfect correspondence, reciprocal correspondence, Venus Earth. That's why the dove, the symbol of Venus, the third aspect of the feminine, the Holy Spirit, is so important now, because it's the dove, the Holy Spirit that brings us over to the new Jupiter, New Jerusalem, third solar logos. So I think we can keep it schematically 1, 2, 3, 4 until the heart, which is our
Okay.
task now.
There's a difference between the numbering of the chakras, and definitely the heart is the 4th chakra, and talking about the lower quaternary. And in that aspect, the heart does not belong to the lower quaternary. Then you have, it's a different tabulation, because the heart is the first expression of the impersonal. It's it's where the soul ties in. The heart and the head center is where the soul ties in to the personality. So you transcend the lower quaternary in order to have a connection with the soul via the heart and head centers. So it's mostly terminology when you're talking about the lower quaternary in terms of centers. You're looking at, and DK tells us this, it's not just my speculation. He calls it below the diaphragm, right? That this is the lower quaternary is below the diaphragm. And on the planes, or in terms of the sheaths, that would be the lower mental, the astral, and the physical sheaths that are the means by which one eventually masters that lower quaternary. When you raise the energy to the heart, then you begin to access the higher mental, which is on the higher 3 subplanes of the mental plane. Now this, Magda, I have tremendous respect for your discipline. It could be a difference in tabulation between the anthroposophy and
Yeah, but I sense that we're saying the same thing, because simply put, the heart is the starting of the soul. So after the three first personality lower chakras, so is the even physiologically to get up to the upper breath until you get over in the tantra techniques to the throat chakra, to the 5th chakra. You have to do this, as you said, sequentially kind of solarization, purification and solarization of the 3 bodies, which is first the astral bodies, then the manas, then the astral buddhi, and then the etheric, and then the physics, sorry, and the physic atmas. So
right.
it's sequentially, and you go, through the zodiacs and the trials and all that. You go in this sequentially, kind of in a like in a 3D machine, that you go over solarization and solarizing and purifying the 3 bodies like that, until you do like the the high master Jesus, that he solarized until the Golgotha to receive the Christ eon. So the 3 bodies completely solarized.
Yeah,
So I think we're saying the same thing, but
I completely agree with you. My point is just simply the difference in semantics when you're talking about the lower quaternary is
Okay, yeah.
always references the personality. And when, he tells us here, the lower four, which correspond to the personality. And in order to get that personality correspondence, then one must include the spleen, the splenic center, because the heart is transpersonal in its influence on the energy system. But I think you're right. I think we're saying the same thing. It's a difference in just semantical focus, on that.
Yeah, and in this discussion, we can throw in the fourth ray, conflict through through conflict harmony, because in this planet number 4, that's the way we evolve, solarizing all these bodies through the conflict to arrive to harmony. So
Right.
I think
And in
this
that
has
way,
to
it
do.
absolutely is connected with the heart. But
Yeah,
you
exactly.
have this 4-5 thing going on because, because the soul energy emanates from the 5th subplane. And so you have this combination of 4th and 5th. Also, the rays of humanity are the 4th and the 5th. So you have the 4th and 5th chakras, the 4th and 5th subplanes, counting both up and down, and this energy interconnection between the throat and the heart are all. And I agree with you. It's a huge part of the um, process of becoming at this time on our Earth globe. Okay, I'm going to go on because Tom has his hand raised. Yes, Tom?
Yeah, I understand the lower 4, but then the higher 3 are heart, throat, and combined agina and crown to make it 3.
Yeah, you have to look at this as principles and not because there's there's a number of centers beginning with the heart and working up a lot more than 3. You can get more than 3. Just all you have to do is separate the ajna center, the head center, the throat, and the heart, and you have 4. But there's even more than that because there's also the alta major, very important center right at the top of the spine. That makes 5. And then you have the 7 head centers, that are reflections of the centers down the spine, which are the primary centers stimulated at the 3rd initiation. So you have to look in terms of the triad and the quaternary when you're looking at the influence that these centers have, right? Rather than trying to figure out exactly which ones they are, because that's going to change also based on where you are in your process of becoming. DK gives us a chart you may remember, maybe 30 pages back. He actually details which centers are active at each level of human becoming, but they tend to represent the the higher triplicity and the lower quaternary, but different centers represent that those for instance, the higher triplicity, right? So at the highest level, for instance, you have this fusion between the ajna and the top of the head center, and the 7 head centers within the head, and that becomes the head center, right? Okay, yeah. So it's just a question of realizing that you have the centers themselves, and they have many different ways of enumerating them, and then you have the idea of the principles of the higher 3 and the lower 4, and those centers align with that concept based on your stage of becoming. Okay, anyone else? Good conversations. Yeah, Santana Star says there are 21 minor centers and 49 minute points. Yeah, and the spleen is really important as it assimilates prana from the sun, earth, and our food. Yes, that's right. And, DK actually tells us that, you have a certain number of vortices that cross, creates a major center. You take one crossing of energetic away, and you have a minor center. Another crossing away, and you have what Santana called uh, uh, a minute center. So yes, we have centers, for instance, in our hands and in our feet, all of which are very important um, in our process of becoming. Okay, let's go ahead and read this passage from Race Initiations. Can we get a reader, please? It describes the development of the centers at the time of the initiation he's probably talking about, which is the first initiation. Reader, please.
Yeah, Gordon, do you want to read?
What is oft omitted from normal consideration is the fact that the increasing activity of these 2 points of light within the head is basically related to what is occurring in the sacral and throat centers. As the transmutative process proceeds and the energies of the sacral center are gathered up into the throat center, without, however, withdrawing all the energy from the lower center. Thus, its normal activity is properly preserved. The 2 centers in the head then become correspondingly active. The negative and the positive elements affect each other, and the light in the head shines forth. A line of light permitting free interplay is established between the ajna center and the head center, and therefore between the pituitary and the pineal gland. When this line of light is present and there is an unobstructed relation between the 2 centers and the 2 glands, then the first initiation becomes possible. When this takes place, it must not be inferred that the task of transmutation going on between the lower and the higher centers and the relationship between the 2 head centers is fully and finally completed and established. The line of light is still tenuous and unstable, but it is in existence.
Thank you, Gordon. This passage is really important because it shows the sequential nature of the process of transference, right? It's not just like, one day you're centered in one of the lower chakras, and the next day it has shifted. And it also, as you were reading, I was thinking about the analogy with the influence of the exoteric compared to the esoteric rulers of the constellations. When he says, for instance, without, however, withdrawing all the energy from the lower center, it's in the same way the exoteric rulers continue to provide a very valuable function to the personality, but the nature of the energy streaming in from those exoteric rulers has changed in that it is not building the personality vehicle anymore, but is rather a means of expression of the soul through that personality vehicle. And of course, between those 2 extremes, where it's completely personality controlled and completely soul controlled, in both paradigms, within the transference of energy in the centers and within the influence of the exoteric versus esoteric rulers, you have where most of us stand, right? Which is some influence from each. as the energy transfers. And you are, in that dual energy, one is enabled in terms of their, of furthering their identification with the soul. Okay, any thoughts about that? Okay. Finally, the dual revolution in the lower centers is clearly to be seen, and the three higher are commencing to be similarly active. The dual revolution, or a wheel turning on itself, is fourth dimensional motion. He's talked about this a number of times. Made possible by, quote, alignment of the inner subtler vortices with the comparatively exoteric etheric centers. Here's a tabulation from earlier in TCF that lists, this is the one I was just talking about, that lists the three higher chakras that are, the quote unquote, three higher chakras that are commencing to be similarly active. In a disciple partially controlled by the ego, at which stage we learn from the text, the lower centers would be fourth dimensionally active. That's the new piece of information that we've learned. But if you remember from this, it's a very valuable series of 6 descriptions that describe what I was talking about before, which 3 primary influences are coming through. Yeah, and at this stage, which I think he doesn't tell us this directly, but that it equates to a man preparing for the first initiation, then you would have the heart, the throat, and the 4 lesser centers and their synthesis, the alta major center. So it seems to me, because of this description, man partially controlled by the ego / advanced man, that this would be the threshold grouping for first initiation. I can't say for certain that that's the case, but I think it makes sense, especially because the next one, if you could peer into the gray here, is the heart, the throat, and the 7 head centers. And that is, you see, notice that it's a higher trinity. But that he gives as a description of the spiritual man to the 3rd initiation, suggesting to me that possibly number 4 here is the first initiation. Yes, James.
So in 4C, the head, that is the 4 lesser centers, are those centers in the head? You know,
Yeah.
like the ajna and the different pituitary and pineal and all that?
They're not the ajna. These are the 4 lesser centers and their synthesis, the alta major centers. You see, you can get a sense by looking at the next one, which is that number C there is the 7 head centers. These are the, DK talks a lot about the heart in the head, for instance. In fact, that's the one he usually talks about when he's talking about the centers. And these are the 7 centers that are the higher reflection of the centers down the spine. To me, what C suggests in number 4 is that the 4 lesser centers, the reflection of the 4 lesser centers in the head, and their synthesis, the alta major center, which is at the top of the spine, is what represents that highest position, or the head center at this
Okay,
stage.
thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Maria Christina.
I don't know, for a long time I've worked with that.
You need to get closer to your mic or something.
Oh, sorry.
Here.
Oh, I see what's wrong, but I'll just yell for the moment. The 4 lesser centers are in the torso and is they come into plumb and align, they align they gather at that alta major center.
Right. I think
Right there, those are the four lesser centers, and they synthesize right there at the alta major center. And then you also have, if you're working more physically, he often mentions that carotid gland, pituitary, and pineal in
right.
the
Well,
head.
those are the glands, you know, and they have their.
Yes, those are the glands. I shifted, I could have left that part out.
Well, that's all right. You know, the glands are the correspondence to the centers, you know,
Mhm.
and that makes sense. But yeah, I think these are, yeah, what you said. I'll just leave it at that. Good.
Coming into plumb.
Okay. Okay, next up. Can we get a reader, please?
Janet, you want to read?
By the application of the rod of initiation at the time of the initiation ceremony, certain results are achieved in connection with the centers, which might be enumerated as follows. A. The fire at the base of the spine is definitely directed to whichever center is the object of special attention. This varies according to the ray or the specialized work of the initiate. B. The center has its activity intensified, its rate of evolution increased, and certain of central spokes of the wheel brought into more active radiance. These spokes, which are also called by some students lotus petals, have a close connection with the different spirae in the permanent atoms. Through their stimulation, there comes into play one or more of the corresponding spirae in the permanent atoms on the three lower planes. After the third initiation, a corresponding stimulation takes place in the permanent atoms of the triad, leading to the coordination of the Buddhic vehicle and the transference of the lower polarization into the higher.
Thank you, Janet. So first, by the application of the rod of initiation at the time of the initiation ceremony, certain results are achieved in connection with the centers, which might be enumerated as follows. This is going to be a long list, a long descriptive list of what happens as a result of the application of the rod. So first is a short one. First, A, the fire at the base of the spine is definitely directed to whichever center is the object of special attention. This varies according to the ray or the specialized work of the initiate. Interesting. It would also, I would think, vary according to which initiation is being taken. So this is a bit of new information compared to what we've been getting. You know, instead of just this sequential, instead of just this uprising of the Kundalini fire that just moves upward from the lowest to the highest, you have, we can hypothesize that the Kundalini energy streaming upward from the base of the spine acts as a kind of common denominator, like the source of this fiery energy, and thus as the vivifying source for each of the chakras, depending on which one is being stimulated, right? We also learned here that the energy streaming from the rod of initiation is not just a general intensification, but is rather a guided process that serves to stimulate certain chakras, not only in accordance with which initiation is being taken, but also taking into consideration one's ray type and specialized work. From this, we might hypothesize, for example, that a second ray type and or one doing a specific type of humanitarian work, for instance, would, during the first initiation, be aided by the rod in transferring the energies from the solar plexus to the heart in order to be more effective in his or her work. Whereas, for example, a fifth ray initiate and or one working in the hard sciences might be aided by the rod in transferring the energies from the sacral center to the throat. Next. The center, yes, Barbara.
Yes, so the rod of initiation is often depicted as something like a magician would have with a rod and this flow of energy coming from it. But it would seem to me there would have to be so much intelligent information in the rod, and that there would have to be an environment for this to take place. And we know that the chakras have, sound and color and certain geometric patterns that it seems to me that it would need to be a much more complex process.
And I think indeed it is. My sense, I don't think he says this anywhere, is that the rod is made up of atomic subplane matter at all levels. So you'd have, physical etheric atomic subplane matter, and that would be the most physical aspect of the rod. And then you would have astral subplane matter, mental subplane, that first subplane, atomic subplane matter. And that and then even though it might have all 7 atomic subplanes as part of its potential, for instance, at the first 2 initiations, only the lower would be active, right? This is just my idea about what the actual physical composition of the rod of initiation would be. And that would be in order to guide and transfer energy from the one initiator, which is then equilibrized by the 3 masters who, as well as the sponsors who have brought the initiate forth and work with it. And in Initiation Human and Solar, he says that even the entire hierarchy stands by and is attentive to every initiation. And so they are a more passive, but definitely are a part of the process as well. But it's a energetic process that is guided very carefully in. He talks later about how there's even that the one initiator moves the wand in very specific ways in order to lift the energy to the appropriate center to be stimulated. And I think that's probably just like the 3rd grade version of the story that is probably an incredibly energetically complex process. So thank you for that question. Yes, James.
This, what we're just saying relates to the whole series, which I've been following on Initiation by Robert Burrell, and getting clear on what initiation is and isn't. And my feeling at this point is that when you're ready to receive the initiation, it's because all of those centers are ready on different levels to receive that energy, and it wouldn't be done before that. But it's like a coordination. It's like shifting gears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's generally what you just said is correct. you are protected as well as stimulated. And, none of the centers that are as yet in process of purification are stimulated because it's dangerous. That lack of purification acts as dross, which can actually burn the system. And so only that they're able to confine the process to the centers that are ready for stimulation. And I would imagine that the first initiation is like an eyedropper compared to the seventh initiation, which would be like just the entire sun, the energy of the entire sun streaming in. So there's going to be such a huge difference in scale, algorithmic from one initiation to the next. Yes, Ariane.
Yes, I have two questions, please. And largely I'm lost, but it's okay. Concerning the spleen, someone writes SS, the spleen is really important as it assimilates prana from the sun, the earth, and our food. It's associated with the third chakra. Is that not true?
It's associated with all the chakras. It distributes pranic energy throughout the system, and prana is the solar enlivening energy of our vehicles, right? So you could say it's the conduit of distribution to our system, not just the third chakra.
Okay, I have a few questions related to that, and then I'll go on to the second question, if you can tolerate this. So the spleen, it's located in the sort of near the diaphragm, and you're saying that it actually is the conduit that transports energy, and this energy is coming from higher influences and also the earth and our food. So in traditional Chinese medicine, I'm an earth official type, 5 element, and my spleen is always underactive, and I'm someone who always struggles with my energy and my health. Is there anything I can do? Do you know? Because I don't know if that's a karmic thing, but
Do we have any healers in the crowd?
who knows?
Yeah, that's
No,
a great question. There are things you can do, definitely.
No, it's actually associated with someone who's an earth official. That's someone who has a lot of sympathy, but tends to ruminate a lot. So, it's not that uncommon among certain types. Actually, there are 5 elements, so that means 20% of all people have this type. I don't know if it's a karmic thing, like there's a strength and associated with it, and there's a liability, which means that my health is not good. So if someone has an answer to that other than Francis, maybe unmic yourself, and then I'll go on to the second question.
Yeah, well, splenic health is overall desirable. There's what happens is that there's an etheric triangle that where prana circulates through, and the spleen then takes that energy of the etheric spleen takes the energy from that triangle, or focalizes the energy from that triangle, and transfers it into the dense physical spleen, right? And so that's how the pranic system works. I know, for instance, just DK's always talking about get out into the sunshine. We think, oh, we're going to get skin cancer, but you could put sunscreen on, and you will still receive the pranic emanations, because that we get that directly from the sun. We get our planetary prana via just literally walking around barefoot on the earth, through our food, through all contact with, for instance, the air. But the solar prana, which comes through a special group of pranic devas streams to us from the sun. And I think Diana has some ideas here as well. Yes, go ahead, Diana.
Well, can you hear me?
Speak loudly.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
Oh, well, first of all, Master DK said that we cannot work with the main centers at all. So we have to avoid to, try to heal any center that directly. This is the first thing. The second thing, that you can work with the pranic triangle, as you mentioned, and you can visualize the light, the solar golden rays coming from impacting your back between the omoplate. I don't know how to say the word in the back, because between the omoplates you have the entry point of the solar rays, and then you can visualize the line from that going to the spleen directly. And in the spleen is a dual center, right?
Right.
And so you can imagine that triangle circulating, and this is all you can do by yourself using the visualization. I have a skin cancer, and I have to avoid imagine I live in the tropical country, and I have to avoid to take sun directly. So no matter the protection I have to avoid it. So the only way that I can submit the pranic energy that I need, for the bones, for example, is by visualization. And I visualize that I almost eating this photon. Welcome the solar Devic entities into my body. And this is the only thing I can say.
Thank you, Diana. That's great information. Yeah, if I remember right, there's a point between the shoulder blades that is other than the heart center. It's DK doesn't describe it in terms of what his proximity to the heart center is, but he tells us there's a point between the shoulder blades and a point below the midway point, again, near the solar plexus, and then the spleen itself, and that those 3 points form a triangle, and you can circulate. So if you can visualize those circulating solar energy, there's nothing as powerful as the imagination, which tends to align us with the actual flow of energy. So, yeah.
Wow, that's so helpful. And I do use visualization. And so when you say solar energy, how would I differentiate that from other energies? You're just saying, like, imagine the sunshine?
By quality. Just imagine that it is indeed solar energy, that it comes from the sun and from the soul aspect, right? As opposed to the third aspect energy that comes from matter, what's called the diffuse energy of matter itself. Everything has prana, but we have this great ability to receive prana directly from the sun, so we can skip a stage. In other words, usually the way a kingdom receives prana is from the next higher kingdom, but in our case, we receive prana, earth, planetary prana, but we are also able to receive solar prana directly. And this is the This is the vivifying prana that will help restore your health.
Wow, that's great. So I have my
You
second
could
question.
visualize it as a golden stream, or this is going to be by ray type, though. See, I don't want to in any way box in your visualization. See which color for you seems most appropriate when you're visualizing the transfer of energy. You might find that electric blue-white energy is more effective, or a warm golden. That's up to the individual.
Mm, very helpful. Okay, so the second question, just briefly, because I don't want to dominate here, is about who is the initiator. When you said that you're describing some higher being helping an initiate or a probationary person start to transfer their identifications and their energies from the lower chakras to the higher, maybe by putting them into karmic experiences where they're going to learn certain lessons. I don't know, but who is the initiator? Do we have individual beings who are in charge of initiation?
Yeah.
Who just do that? They're not masters of wisdom, or are they the masters? Who's doing that?
First and second initiates, during the first and second initiations, the Christ is the initiator, and he uses what's called the lesser rod. And you certainly don't want to think of it as actually less. It's a great rod of power. And then at the third initiation, the one initiator, capital letters, who is Sanat Kumara, who holds the office of planetary logos during the time of this globe, is the one initiator. And so they're very, very high beings indeed. And then masters of wisdom equilibrize the energy around you so that you receive exactly the amount of force that is appropriate.
Yeah, I was aware that the Christ was the initiator for the first and second initiations, but I saw that as more of as like a certain moment in time. I didn't see him as guiding us along the way. Are you saying that he's more involved in our, in the individual steps leading towards and it might be just, at some point the first initiation is achieved. I'm not sure, obviously that's related to some kind of mastery over the body, a certain type of mastery. Maybe it has to do with a certain level of vibration and purity and self-restraint. But are you saying that the Christ Martaya is actually either honing the energies or involved in exposing the probationary disciple to certain experiences? And those are two sub-questions that are very different.
No, the Christ is not directly involved in your process of purification or getting you ready, except for in the fact that he's the head of the hierarchy and therefore his energy permeates the entire hierarchy, including the ashram to which you will eventually be associated. And not even the master of that ashram is directly involved in your purifying process. Rather, you could say elder brothers, intermediate level initiates are involved in that, in impressing you with the energies needed for purification, for instance, when you reach out in meditation, etc. But when you actually stand for initiation, then the Christ comes forward. Okay. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, teamwork here, and I really appreciate the personal reflections too. I thank you all.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, next, the center has its activity intensified, its rate of evolution increased, and certain of the central spokes of the wheel brought into more active radiance. These spokes, which are also called by some students lotus petals, have a close connection with the different spiralae in the permanent atoms. So first of all, a minor point, I'm wondering if DK meant to say the rate of revolution increased rather than the rate of evolution, the former seeming more appropriate in this context, but I'm not going to dwell on that. With the phrase, certain of the central spokes of the wheel brought into more active radiance, DK hints at an inner organization of the chakras that I haven't come across anywhere else in the blue books. It may be there, but for if certain specific spokes are brought into greater radiance, they must have a different quality and thus serve a different specific purpose than the other spokes in the wheel. In the next sentence, we learn one aspect of this difference. Quote, they have a close connection with the different spiralae in the permanent atom. So perhaps these specialized spokes in a given chakra act as a conduit between the permanent atoms and the chakras, allowing the permanent atoms to be updated as to the progress of the indwelling jivas, as well as acting as receptors, talking about these spokes, for the spiritual potency streaming in from the higher spiralae. I'm also thinking about, I believe it was Gordon that brought forth this idea of the vortices being an interconnection between the three shis, the chakras of the shis, and it could be that these specialized spokes are connected with or are the same as these inner vortices. So it remains to be seen. In order to better understand the nature of the connection between the quote unquote certain spokes of the wheel and the spiralae, I think it'd be useful to do a mini tutorial on both spiralae and the permanent atoms that house them. So can we get a reader, please, for this? By the way, these paintings are not actual photos of the permanent atoms, but I thought they were evocative of the ideas. Reader, please.
Kirsten, do you want to read?
The permanent atom is the positive nucleus of germ substance to the sheath wherein it is found. It is that which is the basis of form building, and it is literally a vibrant point of force emanating from the second aspect of the monad, which aggregates to itself and subsequently builds into form, the negative or third aspect. But it must be here remembered that this second aspect is itself dual, and that in considering the permanent atoms, we are dealing with the feminine aspect of the second person. The spiralae, therefore, are but streams of force, or second aspect, vitality, which circulates geometrically within the circumscribing wall of substance, composed of third aspect, force, or substance.
Okay, so he's really focused in this part on just, which aspect is active in the process. And so first we have a permanent atom is the positive nucleus or germ substance to the sheath wherein it is found. Okay, so there's permanent atoms in each of the three sheaths. You have the mental unit for the mental sheath, you have the astral permanent atom for the astral sheath, and the physical permanent atom for the physical. So it is the positive nucleus or germ substance. Remember, it exists in atomic substance, the highest subplane of each plane. And it has that relationship to the sheath where it is found. Decay tells us on page 506 that that the sheath containing the permanent atom is the causal body. That these permanent atoms, even though on the cosmic physical plane chart, they're arrayed downwards on the first subplane, that they in fact all exist within the causal body. Could we get a reader for this, please?
Magda, you want to read?
Yes. The causal body is that sheet of mental substance which is formed at the moment of individualization. Within this sheet are to be found three atoms, which have been termed the mental unit, the astral permanent atom, and the physical permanent atom. They correspond individually to the seventh principle of each of the three persons of the microcosmic triad, a reflection in the three worlds of the microcosm of the three persons of the logoic trinity.
So another way of saying that is they anchor the three principles, the mental, astral, and physical sheaths. They anchor them in, they anchor our sheaths in those, on those three levels. The idea that the three permanent atoms form the seventh principle of the triad suggests that it is these permanent atoms that collectively anchor spirit in form. Next, it is that which is the basis of form building, and it is literally a vibrant point of force. So permanent atoms hold the qualitative info, thus far developed in the career of an individual human being. Within three vibrant points of force, which form the basis, the positive polarity of the seventh principle, used to build the mental, astral, and physical vehicles. So they're like a nexus of quality that determine the nature of the sheaths that are to be built. Next, emanating from the second aspect of the monad, which is the soul as triad. That's the source that's their ultimate source. Next, which aggregates to itself and subsequently builds into form the negative or third aspect. So through the law of attraction, the triadal source, via the positive polarity of the permanent atoms, attracts atoms of substance that are in line with the qualitative info stored in the permanent atoms. It draws the appropriate substance, then uses this substance to build the mental, astral, and etheric sheaths of an incarnate human being. Next. But it must here be remembered that this second aspect is itself dual, and that in considering the permanent atoms, we are dealing with the feminine aspect of the second person. So the soul is both masculine and feminine. The masculine or positive polarity is oriented to its triadal source, the feminine to the builders of the personality sheaths. And this feminine aspect, we find out in the next sentence, is the source of the spirale. Quote, the spirale, therefore, are but streams of force or second aspect vitality. So spirale are the units of second aspect vitality emanating from the feminine or outwardly creative aspect of the triad, downwardly focused, right? And infusing its negative counterpart, the mental, astral, physical vehicles, with vitality. Finally, which circulates geometrically within the circumscribing wall of substance, composed of third aspect force or substance. And in so doing, vitalizes with their second aspect force the third aspect sheaths that they inhabit. Okay. Yes, Barbara.
Yes, it's such a rich visual. Um, so in some way, are the inner spirals of the permanent atoms and um, uh, apparently the permanent atoms are pulled out on as a string of pearls going into Kamaloka. Then are they reactivated in a new birth and within a new force here?
Yeah. Yes, they are. First of all, that first subplane atomic substance is not subject to the vagaries of what you call Kamaloka or the Kama Manasic impact at all. It remains purely a matrix of an energetic matrix that holds the patterns intact, and they're not impacted by, you could say, that which is created from them, right? Which is the lower 6 subplanes of each of the lower 3 planes, right? So they hold their own purity by the fact that they're made composed of this atomic substance. So yes, they're like a string of pearls, and they seem to extend down into, mental, astral, and etheric matter, but in a more fundamental way, they hold the same vibratory level as the causal body does. Does that answer your question, Barbara?
Yes, it does. So the causal body actually is more the blueprint than the permanent atoms are.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And where do the skandhas come into the picture?
Where did the whats?
The skandhas?
Oh, I don't know too much about skandhas. I'm afraid you get me off of DK and I get wobbly real quick. So I can't really answer that part of it. But I can say that the permanent atoms are just one component of the causal body, right? But it's deeply interconnected because, all the light that we generate is over, thousands of lifetimes, is stored in the causal body, which grows until a point that its vibratory quality allows us to be initiated. The permanent atoms, the function of the permanent atoms is to store the nature of that qualitative increase from lifetime to lifetime. Yes, Ariane.
This one will be quicker because I know you're drawing too close. So when you're talking about permanent atoms, I thought there were only 3 permanent atoms when you died that went into your soul. Are you saying that if someone is more of an adept, they generate more permanent atoms?
No. I don't. The 3 permanent atoms having to do with the lower 3 sheaths are those responsible for determining the qualitative aspect of your next incarnation. So that from an abstract point of view, you pick up where you left off in the last lifetime, though it's not any kind of literal thing. But it is in terms of a quality aspect. This is why, you don't, you're not reincarnated as a grasshopper after having been, a human being, because it wouldn't work in terms of what's stored in the 3 permanent atoms. In fact, you'll be very specifically guided to the next appropriate level of human being, right?
Yeah, that I understand. I just thought you were talking about multiple permanent atoms.
Well, there are higher permanent atoms, but they're not functional in the process of reincarnation. There's a Buddhic, an atmic, a monadic, and a logoic permanent atoms, that govern the sheaths that we eventually inhabit and bring to life. And then those permanent atoms come forth.
Yeah, I just have two comments quickly. So this all makes sense that, for instance, Sanat Kumara, who's more associated with the will aspect, and Shambhala would only be involved in later initiations because we can't bear the force, the energy of higher initiations. We just physically, psychologically can't do it. And then it reminds me also, there was at some time, I don't know if anyone here else saw it, there were like these there was like a show of like these little ivory like balls that had been found from like the skeletal remains of past highly adept Buddhic practitioners. They were like on tour around America. I don't know if anyone knows, they were like little pieces of ivory pearls, and they were supposedly generated by the adept around their neck. So does this relate to like what you were talking about here about being able to generate not only something with light, but there's something that is made manifest in the body? And is it also related to that spinal chakra? You said there was chakras at the base of the neck and the base of the spine. Also, I'm just trying to understand, follow what you're saying, but basically someone who's more evolved is generating not only energy and light, but matter as well.
Could a very high initiate could actually magically manifest, using 7th ray could actually manifest that type of phenomenon, but it wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with the permanent atoms. So, okay, we're done for today. Thank you all for a very lively exchange.